everybody, it's James from the On Whose Shoulders podcast. Today, my guest is going to be Bob Kobielush. Bob was actually on staff at Trout Lake Camps, this camp I worked for back in the day. He was also the president of CCCA, Christian Camping Conference Association, although back then we called it CCI, Christian Camping International. And Bob, I'm so excited that we're going to get time to be able to talk to him. And he's got such amazing insight, such a forward thinker in Christian camping, and I can't wait till you hear this podcast. The only other thing I'll mention is that not all of these podcasts will be trout specific. We'll have lots of guests from non-trout camps talking about camping in general, but this one does talk about trout quite a bit. I hope you enjoy. I am here with one of my all-time camping heroes for so many different reasons. One, that Bob Kobielush was the executive director of Trout Lake Camps back in the day, which we'll get into a little bit. Two, because Bob Kobielush is just a huge figure in Christian camping in that he was the president of CCI, Christian Camping International. It's weird. It was so hard to say the other one. Now it's hard to say the original one. For 19 years. 19 years. And just had a foundational effect on so many camps across the country. And so when we're talking about on whose shoulders that we stand, Bob Kobielush is one of the most significant set of shoulders in Christian camping for 19 years, in that he ran the organization nationally that was helping so many camps get educated, have relationships with other leaders, get to know each other, just did unbelievable work in that time. So I'm going to try to go back a little bit. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's probably all downhill from here. I don't need to hear anything more. I'm ready to leave.
Tell me about, go back right before when you came to Trout. So what were you doing and what got you to be the executive director of Trout Lake Camps?
Okay. Well, I was actually a youth pastor at Trinity Baptist Church in St. Paul.
Okay.
I had just graduated from seminary, and those were interesting days. The Vietnam War was still going. The Jesus movement had just started. And so those were times that were ripe for change. And I was a youth pastor there. And actually, I didn't want the job coming to work for the Minnesota Baptist Conference. I was perfectly happy where I was. But the search committee reached out to me. They thought, well, what we need is a youth pastor to be the head of Trout Lake Camp. But actually, once you get the job, you know that's a whole lot more than just being a youth pastor.
For sure.
Although youth pastors are great, but it's just one component of it. So actually, they hired me to be the director of youth and camping for the Minnesota Baptist Conference back then, about 145 churches. So I came from the youth pastorate, and I actually had 3 camps and I was in charge of. I was in charge of Trout Lake Camp.
Yep.
We had Kings Ranch at the time in Cambridge.
Okay.
We had Mink Lake Camp. And then I was asked to do some things to help all the youth work of the conference.
Okay.
So Trout was the largest of the challenge, of course. But my span of control and ministry were those operations.
And that's titled Big Trout Lake Bible Camp then, right?
It was back then. Right?
Yep. And so difference between then and now, for those of you seen recently, it was one site, just the point, that we call it now.
Right.
And it was all ages, different weeks.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool.
And that was the operation, the whole site, the whole program, everything we did. And I followed a giant of a man called Lee Kingsley.
Yep.
He was the first director of Trout Lake Camp. He was actually Christian education director for the Minnesota Baptist Conference, but one of his responsibilities was Trout Lake Camp. So I followed this giant of a man who came in 1946, 47, when Trout Lake just started. And he was there then until I came.
Wow.
And they always say you should, if you're smart, you should always follow a loser. But I followed a winner.
Yep.
So I really had my work cut out for me.
Wow. And so when you first started working as executive director here, it was a lot more volunteer based back then. Tell me about how that worked.
Well, it worked because of the personality of Lee Kingsley. And I found out that he had a lot of people that came just because they loved him and they loved the ministry.
Okay.
And I thought to myself, this Bob Kobielush, he just comes from a youth pastorate. Nobody knows him.
Yep.
So I developed a lot of systems during that 9+ years that I was here. I believe that I had to systematize and kind of manage the process that was given to me. And as a result of that, we put together a lot of programs that would attract volunteers, like we had all volunteer counselors.
Yep.
We were responsible to have about 50 counselors, volunteers every week.
Wow.
And we had to recruit them. So when it got down the end of the summer, we had probably recruited and used about 1,000 volunteers to run the camping ministry. And you can imagine what a blessing that is to have that many people now are going and talking about the ministry.
Yep.
But what a challenge it is to maintain some degree of direction and continuity in that thing. So we put together systems that would help the volunteers be more productive and more focused and more managed.
Now, back in those days, there's stories of camp starting tomorrow, but you're on the phone trying to get 2 more cabin leaders to come show up tomorrow to be a cabin leader next week.
That's correct.
Because it wasn't college staff or any high school staff that was coming up. It was adults, postmen, different people, teachers, people like that would come and volunteer for and be in the cabins with kids.
Yep. And then when I got smart, I delegated that to people I was managed. But I'll have to tell you, that was a day before cell phones.
Yes.
And so I know every phone booth between here and St. Paul because I would stop at phone booths to try to seal deals with people in the first few years I was there. But
and this is there's either a cabin leader or not level kind of problems.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow.
So
wow.
I hired a guy one summer, and I developed a manual of operations, and I believe in systematizing things and do things in an organized manner, even though I'm more of a visionary. And then I would develop it and then give it to somebody else to do. So I always saw myself as being the visionary, getting someone excited about something, conceptualizing it. And then giving it to someone else, then I'd move to the back of the pew in the church, the back pew in the church, and look and see what else needed to be done, and then I would do it. So that was a part of my leadership style.
Wow. So in those 19 years, you get there in the beginning, and you're like, I'm just a youth pastor guy taking over from this giant of the industry.
Right.
I'm going to start putting systems in place and things like that. So what was it hard to put those systems in place? Was it easily done? Or was it more of a wrestling act trying to get those things in place?
No, for me it came kind of naturally because I'm kind of a weird guy. People see me as a visionary and a person that leads well and casts vision and so forth. But in my mind, I'm always thinking about how can I systematize it to multiply it. I never think in terms of addition to my leadership. I think of multiplication. And if you don't have a system that you can hand to somebody else, you really have no chance of getting it multiplied.
Yeah, it's a great point. So what, in the early days, what was the hard thing? What was the difficulty in keeping camp moving forward?
I would say that it was a mixed blessing being a denominational camp.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm being pretty blunt right here. What do I have to lose? I'm 82. But the wonderful blessing of having the umbrella of 145 churches was also a very tough thing because you had to convince basically 142 units that you were not only viable, but you were necessary for them to use as a camp. And so the gap between the churches and what happened at camp was a very tough thing for me to manage because it always seemed like it should be natural that a church should see how vital a camp retreat experience should be to their own life. It was just a natural. But I had to convince them that it was. But then it didn't take too long when the kids came home blessed and families came home blessed and things. And
it's almost convincing them of that first experience of that shared ministry mindset and that we can help you with that mountaintop experience. But then you take that mountaintop experience back home and it really pays out dividends in the spiritual life of the volunteers or the campers or stuff like that.
I always felt like I was an interpreter between the camps and the churches.
Wow. Now, in your time, you built up Trout from what it was. So what are some of the buildings that you needed to continue ministry?
You're talking about the physical buildings?
Yeah.
Well, basically, the buildings were here, but I just had to augment some of them.
Yep.
And so it was not that it grew, but we added the 80 acres here that now has become your wonderful timber ridge camp.
Yep.
And so we augmented buildings.
Yep. And you did Shalom House too, kind of that hotel style building.
Shalom House was built during that time.
Was that a difficulty in finding funding and finding how that would start out?
Well, basically, if the truth be known of that, some of the funding or most of the funding came from the sale of King's Ranch.
Okay.
We decided that after we had these 3 camps, Mink Lake Camp, King's Ranch, and Trout Lake Camp, that King's Ranch was no longer meeting the needs that we had envisioned for the future, meeting the needs of our churches. It was basically a rental facility.
Wow.
And so when the Shalom House concept started, it was actually started in hotels by an executive minister from the Minnesota Baptist Conference, and he ran couples retreats in hotels. Then we saw enough involvement of people that we said, well, let's build a place for Shalom Retreats. That's the name, Shalom Retreats, peace, bringing couples together and helping people in their couples in their lives. And that's how Shalom House started.
Wow.
It was originally supposed to be in another part of the state, but I guess I convinced the board that they ought to bring Shalom House to Trout Lake Camp, and it would be easier to manage and have another facility here than to have it some other remote place and wonder how you're going to manage that.
So as we're kind of driving around camp and going around the point, kind of that original camp that goes back to 45, 47, you grab it, you're taking hold, you kind of got the buildings in place, but you're trying to put in systems that can maintain kind of the learning of camp and how it works successfully. Right. And then kind of adding a building that here's a program piece that goes with it. Yeah. So from that start and getting to those pieces, when you left your time here, and what was the success points? You're like, thank goodness we pulled that off in my time here.
Yeah, it was something that could be handed off to somebody else who understood how to run systems and manage systems. You see, this is not foreign to Christian camping. Post-World War II was kind of a founder's mentality where people came back from World War II and saw the ravages of World War II and wanted to give themselves to something meaningful in Christian ministry. There were a lot of camps. The majority of our camps were founded post-World War II. And so Trout Lake fits that pattern, and they had a founding director in Lee Kingsley. And the thing that happens around a founder is they are kind of the Pied Piper of the movement, and people just naturally gravitate toward them, and they become a part of building this wonderful thing around the founder who they trust. But eventually it comes to a particular point that the generations change and people change, and you have to build a system that will maintain the future as opposed to just a person. And so when I left, I felt that I had set up Trout Lake Camp in terms of its financial systems, its operating systems, its programmatic systems, its staffing systems, so that they had a base upon which to build.
That doesn't sound terribly different from a megachurch today that tends to start on a personality. Right. You grow this huge kind of system in place, and then that megachurch starter kind of drifts away or retires or whatever, and then they've got to figure out a way to move that forward. That's really interesting.
It is, but the thing is that if you systematize something and then people just work the systems, it tends to become an institution, and institutionalism, as far as I'm concerned, is a death knell. And so how do you keep that entrepreneurial spirit? So when Roger Cameron followed me, he brought a wonderful sense of development beyond what was at the point. And he was more of as I see it, more of a hands-on guy. I was more of a conceptual kind of a guy. He was a hands-on guy. So when he said, well, let's build something, let's cut the lumber, let's make these buildings, here's what we do. That's the dimension that he brought based on the systems that I had set up.
Awesome.
And he avoided having the place become an institution because he showed people how the dream could become reality.
Walk me through one more thing. On our tour today, you talked a lot about the Jesus movement. So tell me Jesus movement beginning of here to kind of when you left too. What is the Jesus movement? Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, the Jesus movement was from the late 60s to the early 70s. It was followed on the heels of a lot of turmoil within our country where the generation then had dropped out, and Vietnam War had contributed to a tremendous amount of dissatisfaction with the traditional, with how government was run, and how everything was just falling apart in the Vietnam years. Well, the Jesus movement came about as people returning to the Lord as a hope for the future because everything seemed to be falling apart. And what happened in the Jesus movement, the institutional church was challenged as to what it was or wasn't. And I was a youth pastor during those days. So I realized, working in the church as a youth pastor at those days, that there was a growing gap between what these new discoveries were as to who Jesus could be in your life, Jesus revolution, they called it, and what the church looked like. And so we had street ministries and that kind of stuff at Trinity Baptist Church. I think that kind of captured the attention of the people who were looking for a new director at Trout Lake Camp. And then I would say, coming to Trout Lake Camp, we were a place where people could express themselves and discover who Jesus is. And become either reinvigorated to go back to the church, or they went back to the church and were disappointed. And so there was a revolutionary time. And I have to say, James, that I see the same thing happening today. I see that the role the camp can and should play with Gen Z is very critical, because Gen Z has become totally disillusioned with so many of the institutional forms that we have in Christianity, which include the church, which include adults like myself who have messed up a lot of things in their lives. And a culture that has gone amok. And so I think camps have a tremendous role. I think there's a lot of knowledge to be transferred from what happened during the Jesus movement and the role that the Christian camping played to today, when Gen Z is coming up and saying, oh, this place is a mess.
I think my generation has to put our hand up and say, we totally messed something up there, because
well, you learned it from us.
There's this unbelievable movement right now in the Gen Zs, and the young ones right now, they are thirsty for the Bible. We notice that at camp all the time. They want to read the Bible. They're looking for a foundation, this mindset of there's nothing to have a foundation with, and you make it up as you go. The kids aren't buying that today, where we have parents, so they'll send us pictures from their trip home from camp, sitting at McDonald's, and their kids reading their Bible. And we're going, there's a hunger there for a foundation. It's different than the Jesus movement. When I think of Jesus movement, I think of the music, that started, modern contemporary Christian music. And, I think of the preaching styles of that time. But the kids today are asking, can you help me with this foundation? And I think that's something that the camps today really need to look at.
Oh, absolutely. The role that the camp should play in discipleship in the beginning of the journey for kids and going in the right direction, who are in a culture and walking into a culture whose norms don't exist. And they are just all over the place. So they give them a foundational understanding that Scripture is your foundation, no matter what generation you're living in. But how that applies to their culture, I may go off the rails here a little bit when I talk about Charlie Kirk phenomenon and turning point, because that's been so wrapped up in the political movement. But if you look behind it, there's a faith-based component to that. And if somehow you can look at Turning Point, what the Charlie Kirk phenomenon has been, it says it's a glaring example, it's a living example of how people can look and say, man, there is a hunger. And the role of Christian camps, I think, is to take the faith component of that and say, boy, these kids want a turning point in their lives, and they need to know what's the foundational stuff.
There's a little bit of there's nothing new under the sun in that mindset of sharing the gospel with kids from 1940 whatever to 2020 whatever. It's still that same thing, but how can camps be sure that we are presenting kids with a gospel that they can understand, that they can appreciate, and know with Trout, one of the things we really work on is we don't want to just give kids verses. We want to give them entire books in the Bible. We want to give them entire stories or entire groups of people in the Bible,
Right.
and make sure that we're building foundations, not just taking a good story and adding a Bible verse to it.
Well, one of the things that was different from back when I was executive director, when a kid decided to follow Jesus Christ, or had come to camp and had a wonderful experience, because we had wild music here and crazy. I don't want to think some of the pastors thought, what in the world are they doing up there? We would rock the place. And there are other stories that weren't so great, because I can remember a certain retreat we had in the fall during MEA weekend. The marijuana just wafted through the air, because it was unbelievable, because during those 70s it was revolution. And the kids didn't take the marijuana out of their pocket when they came to camp sometimes.
Wow.
So it was a very challenging time, but in those days I could be fairly sure that when they left here, there would be a place for them to plug into a local church where there was a Sunday school or a youth group or someone. I'm telling you, I'm sorry to say, I don't think you can count on that anymore. So the role becomes, how does the camp continue to relate to the local church? God's ordained institution form of existing in the local. But I think the camp has got to be much more aware of, how do you not only make that transition, not to a local church that may or may not be giving them the gospel, but how can you maintain some type of tie to feed them the gospel? And I think what we're doing here could be used dramatically in the days ahead, so every camper could get into get into some type of a site and just say, "Wow, it's good to hear from my counselor again."
Because again, going back in 1940, whatever, it was about that life change just as much as it is about today.
Correct.
And God has the ability to use the tool of Christian camping in the way that He sees fit, no matter who's coming through the doors. He wants to move in the hearts of people.
Yeah, but the difference is that the culture has changed so dramatically that to go back to the culture that they're in, someone needs to help hold their hand, so to speak. And some churches can, some churches can't. And I had a greater assurance back then that the churches had the capacity to bridge that gap. Now, that may not be popular to say, but I don't really care. I think the camp's role is to help the kid take what they've experienced here back home and interpret it properly, because the culture back home was very different than it was in the 70s.
Yeah, that's for sure. So you're at Trout. You go through this time of getting. Oh, I did want to show this. This is a staff manual in your day, late 70s, early 80s. This is a staff manual now, just to look at the size of it in what the expectations of a camp are. Before we leave Trout and go to CCCA stuff, in the future of camping, besides getting more systems in place, what do you see in the future of Christian camping for a place like Trout?
Well, Trout, now having gone on the tour with you, Trout has now captured where the leading edge is for camping. And by that I mean that I know you just wrote an article about the value of small camps and so forth. That. But quite frankly, the day of the small camp is over.
You think?
I think so. You can't escape the economics of our world. And for a camp to compete for the attention of people and meet their needs in the days ahead, they do not have the facilities, the program, the capacity, the staff, and so forth to keep that going.
It's really difficult.
So now, having given that bad news, is that Trout Lake has captured the ability to provide community, a small community, by your programming within the large camp. And the camp that can't capture that smaller unit and feed that smaller unit, used to be just a cabin group, and infuse that into their camp, they won't be able to survive just to be a small group running a small camp. So the future belongs to the camps like Trout Lake Camp, And you've learned it from other camps across the country.
For sure.
See, you haven't isolated yourself. You have looked at other camps across the country, and you have put yourself at the leading edge of having enough volume. I'm talking more like a business person now.
Yep.
You've got to leverage volume
Yep.
and get scale
Yep.
in order to provide that quality experience without losing the small community that you minister to. Ultimately, it's the one person you're trying to reach.
Yep.
But if that one person is not put in that small unit and it's programmatically done correctly, then you lose the ability to really make that stick.
And I think you're right. I think there's two camp systems that are kind of happening nationally right now. And it's not different than churches, where you've got either a bunch of churches combining into a big mass of churches. Right. There might be one campus that's bigger than the others, but then there's all these others. You've got churches that are, or camps that are combining just like that across the country, where you've got this one that's really good. There's this smaller camp that's so good at this niche thing, but they're amazing at it, but they're having a problem getting payroll. Right. But then you get this one and this one and this one together, and they go together. Right. So it's a camp that's kind of overseeing multiple properties and taking overhead away. Yeah. Or you've got a camp like us that was a mid-sized camp that's growing into that bigger mid-sized camp that then develops on its property 3 different or 4 different or 5 different sites.
James,
that are very specific.
You hit it right on the head. In the early 2000s, I saw this coming. Yep. And I took my cues and lessons from what I saw in the hardware store business. Okay. Hardware stores, you have small hardware stores anymore? No, you don't anymore. Yep. You got Home Depot, you got Lowe's, you got Menards. Yep. Or you become a part of a conglomerate like Ace, like a franchise. Yep. Yep. And I took my cues from that. I took my cues from the world of business and said, this is going to happen to camps. Yeah. And so camps are rolling up into bigger units, or they should be rolling up into bigger units. Yep. Either expanding on their own property like you have done, and there are camp models like that around the country. Yep. And then there are other models that are beginning to develop where they take over camps that are failing, and they take all of their management systems and their marketing and their sales and their purchasing and everything and leverage that over that whole system of maybe 4 or 5 camps in different parts of the country or different regions of the country. Yeah. And those are to me, that's the hope for the future. Yeah. And so I always felt, even when I left leadership 15 years ago, I always felt that I would probably see fewer camp organizations, but I always wanted to see more campers. Yeah. And so you want to be little sites with unbelievable amounts of relationship going on in a bigger institution that's capable of carrying those places. Because, and again, any ministry, whether at church or camp or missions or whatever, you have these two competing things: that ministry bubble and the how do we pay our staff, and pay the bills and have social media and how do we do both at the same time? If you're going to be a successful camp, you got to have a solvent ministry. If you're just pursuing solvency, there's a lot easier way to make money. That's for sure. If you're just pursuing ministry, you aren't going to be long. Yeah. Because you live in the world, and the world has an economic reality to it. So if you want the wonderful things that God has for you over here, you got to be able to understand this over here, which is the solvency part of it. And in order to get that for the future, compete in the marketplace, to provide the kind of services and to be able to do that. Yep. You got one of the two models. You either have a multiple number of sites, might be a small camp, a real large camp, whatever, different parts of this country, and you take all of the common stuff and use that to leverage so that you can be viable, solvent, or you develop the property like you have done so marvelously here. Mm-hmm. So let's slip back for a minute. You were at Trout. You're executive director. You're on year 19. Somehow you go to being in charge of Christian Camping International. Yeah, it was actually CCI USA. USA. Okay. Yeah. So how did that change happen? Well, basically, when I was here, I began to see that there were very many models around the country. And I became very intrigued with that. But I thought, in order for me to know more about that, I better be involved in the association. So I got elected to be the Midwest Regional Director while I was here. And that just began the journey of seeing a bigger picture And I got elected to be in that position. Didn't want that position either. I've never wanted a position I've ever gotten, but for some reason, God had an idea for me, you know. And then I went from that to actually being here, and was asked by the association to do some things. I was fairly good at education and leadership development things. So I was asked to help with a national convention, put the educational program together for a national convention.
Okay.
And that was in 1981.
Who was president of that at that time?
That was John Pearson.
Pearson, okay.
And I happened to be on the board of directors for the association. So just like you and several other camping people around, you realize that there's a world out there too. And you not only learn from it, but you give to it. And that's what happened here. And that in those years, my formative years, I realized that even though Trout Lake was great and I was overwhelmed with all the work I had to do, there was a world that was even bigger than that. And so by being involved in the association eventually led to the fact that I was asked to become the leadership development and certification director. So I wrote the book for certification for camps and did a lot of things. But if it hadn't been for the incubator of Trout Lake Camp, Mink Lake Camp at the time, which was a totally different type of a place to run, thing to run. If it hadn't been for this as an incubator, that's not a derogatory term. Incubator is a great place because it's a place where good things are birthed in your life personally. And if it hadn't been for this incubator, I would have never had the platform of the understanding to go on to provide leadership on a national and international level.
So those early years in CCI, the mantra was education, or the mantra was relationship, or the mantra was how to run a camp. What was the driving thing there?
It all grew out of relationships.
Okay.
And the association began by people like yourself and other people, the founders, that would come together to share ideas. But it was always driven by education, but it was a relational kind of education. Oh, you've done that. Well, maybe I should do that. So it was a copycat was great, which is still alive and well is the best way to learn. Try to copy, augment what somebody else has done so it doesn't look too much like it, so it doesn't look like you're stealing the idea. You know?
I'm familiar.
But I would guess my contribution to education was that I saw that the peer-to-peer learning had run its course.
Okay.
No, it hadn't run its course. It was core to learning, but I brought outside education into the association. So I had the personnel director for TRW in Southern California do a lot of my human resources stuff. I had a guy from Princeton Management Company in New Jersey do a lot of things about decision making and problem solving. I had another guy from the Wilson Learning Corporation here in Minneapolis get involved with us in talking about human relations and how you worked in management. And so it was always an educational base, but I augmented the peer-to-peer learning with outside formalized learning that came from the corporate and the business structure. And thus back to the thing. It's about solvency and it's about ministry. And camps were great at sharing stories and learning from one another about ministry. But came a little weak on the side of the understanding marketing and sales and finance and purchasing and public relations and stuff like that. So that was early on, that's a contribution I made.
In those early years of CCI, what you're trying to do is you're trying to put these camps together in the same room. You're trying to give them an education from not just camps, but other sources, and create these relationships between camps, in which, because those early years would have been outstanding to be in that network, because camps were growing like crazy, right?
Yeah, they were growing like crazy. It was as natural as an organic thing, as they say. But the thing that was very interesting was that I came in and just what happened at Trout Lake, the age of the founders was transitioning to an age of management and leadership. And I saw that very clearly, that the people that were inheriting the leadership roles and the management roles from those who were the founders were not properly equipped to make that transition. And so that in the association, that's when we began sections. And we had 26 sections across the country. And people like you have stepped to the plate just enormously to run your sectional conferences.
Yeah.
So that education became core, but it was relational.
Yeah.
And it multiplied throughout the United States.
Yeah.
Through 26 different sectional conferences. And then we had the national conference, but not everybody could go to the national conference. But guys like you, men and women like you, would come to the national conference and be challenged at a higher level. So it was kind of a force multiplier, as they say these days, so that what happened from the national trickled down to the sections and then down to the local camp, and people like you stepped to the plate to make sure that happened.
Well, I was so blessed. So we'll start at the regionals. I was from Michigan originally, so going to the Michigan sectional, which is an amazing sectional with all different sizes of camps, all different kinds of leadership.
Right.
And I'd had previous friends. My director at Bear Lake was super heavily involved, Bob Tissett, in that section.
Right.
And then he connected me to the other places. But those relationships were so foundational, because part of the difficulty of being in camping, I think, is you can't walk into a restaurant and start a conversation with somebody about what you do for a living, or even, pastors are even harder. Youth pastors, it's hard to understand. And again, you go further back in time, one person doing what is now 10 people's jobs at a camp. Right. So it's hard to understand what that was. But when you went to a CCCA or a CCI event, you could be with a peer that you understood what you guys were talking about.
Absolutely.
And then you go to the national level, and I'll use the national that had the biggest moment with me. Maybe you can help me out. Mike Yaconelli got up and spoke, and then two other guys spoke during that same session. And it was at one of the national conferences. I'm blanking on who the two other guys are, but I saw somebody get up and talk about youth ministry in a way that I'd never heard before, as anybody that ever walked. And so the national conference would bring this outsider's view, or look at what is going on in youth ministry in the planet, and it would help a camp have an understanding of, like you said earlier, that thing that is so much bigger than us, and then it just lights up your mind with the possibilities of. Oh my goodness, here's a guy changing the world, with youth specialties at the time, which doesn't quite exist anymore, and all those things, but changing the world. And if only I could do just a little hair of that. That's what the national conference did for me, is there was so much education, so much look at this over here. And that was a lot of your driving nationals, right?
Yeah, right. Well, that's what it was, the hope. That was the hope that it would happen. And so that's why it's so encouraging for me to come and talk to you, because I see how that not only has stuck, but you've taken it far beyond what I thought would happen, And that's always the wonderful surprise when you plant a seed, and then what grows from that seed blossoms into something great that you never even really imagined, but you were glad you helped plant the seed.
And that's what this podcast is about, on whose shoulders is the concept of what's happening now in camping doesn't exist without you bringing Yaconelli there in 2000, whatever it was, or with there's so many snowballs on top of snowballs on top of snowballs in camping that I'm very nervous that we forget those early days, that we forget those moments and those big changes, and just think, well, it was always like this. One thing in camping, we have a game called Mafia that we've been playing here since before my time here, and a staff member said, we've always played Mafia like that, and you're like, Mafia looks nothing like the game that even was 4 years ago, yet 20 years ago. It changes, the systems change, but are you still as a camp reaching out and being a tool for God to touching souls of campers, and are you doing that effectively? That's what I think CCCA or CCI did, is they just kept putting in front of us, whether it's sectional level or national level, here's an example of somebody that's doing unbelievable things. How can that touch your camp?
But the unfortunate thing is, James, you say it so well, because you stand as an example of how the system is supposed to work. But you feel sorry for the person that never avails themselves to something outside of themselves. And I remember youth specialties was a big deal when I was here. And I used to go to the youth specialties conferences. People didn't know sometimes what I did on the side, but I was exposing to the outside so that I could bring new and fresh ideas here. But the unfortunate thing is that many times that which exists out here never connects with here. And so it takes an effort on a person here. It takes an effort on their part to reach out And then when they go to see that other idea, I don't even want to put it up there because it really comes to fruition when this blossoms.
Yep.
But they go out there to expose themselves to other things.
Yep.
And unfortunately, there's people in all types of walk in life that never do that.
Yeah.
And they cocoon.
Yep.
They cocoon, and then they become complainers, and then they become complacent, and then nothing really happens. But the role of an association is to make sure that you present enough stuff out here so that something here will stick.
Yep.
And I think that's what's happened, and that's what gives me the greatest joy in life. It's multiplication of ministry as opposed to just adding to someone's understanding.
And that's hard, too, because you do have camps out there that are traditional camps that kind of we found this thing and we keep kind of it's kind of like a teacher that's teaching math, and they get to the third year, they've perfected their curriculum, and then the rest of their life they just keep looping through that math curriculum because math doesn't change, right? It's
just try relating to your grandkids. You don't realize it has.
It is, maybe I'm picking a bad example, but it's important, I think, that camps, and again, I want to be careful. I'm not saying spiritually. I think the more traditional spiritual teaching, the more biblical spiritual teaching, the more we focus on those things, the stronger we can make those things. But in the culture piece and hitting the kids in our time and the staff in our time, that takes some adjustment to try to figure that out. And that, I think, is going back to the awesome thing that CCCA or CCI did through the years.
Yeah. Well, I think that camping historically used to be a tool for evangelism only.
Okay.
When you bring the kid to camp and you get him saved, or a person would come to camp, and for some reason, everything that they had heard about from either their parents or their church or whatever clicked, and they said, "I've got to ask Jesus into my life and my heart."
Yeah.
Now, I hope that that's still core to Christian camping now and in the future.
Sure.
But what has changed, in my opinion, is that camps have got to play a bigger role in the discipleship and the follow-up on that experience.
Wow. I never even thought of it that way.
And it happens in the lives of staff. It's you got to be very intentional in the lives of staff, that there's a whole role to play, because don't kid yourself. The staff person that comes to camp, even though they may look very good on the application and may do very good in the interview, they got some poles and components over here that are very ungodly. Now, whether they work them out or not, but they live in a culture that has compromised itself to such an extent that for them to be discipled, to learn what God really has for them, is a major role. Now just take that and put that in the lives of the 5,000 campers you had here last year. That you do have a role in seeing them through the culture they go to. I almost feel bad saying that, because it used to be back when I was there, well, just get them saved here, send them back home to the church, and the church will help them. Wow. I tell you, that gap has become greater than it's ever been.
That is a really interesting insight of the older system versus the modern system. Trout spends so much time working on not only discipleship, but what each age group does. So at this camp, we're trying to teach them this part of the Bible. At this camp, this age group, we're teaching them that part of the Bible. This, at this being on staff, we're doing this. At internship, we're doing this. But what you're saying is, back in the day, the goal was, hey, get as many kids as you possibly get saved. But over time, that's grown to not just that salvation moment, but also to that next level, keep coming back, grow through the system kind of thing.
And that's why I get so excited about social media and podcasts and things like this, because I think a camp out of this very room, like your camp here, via the podcast and social media, ought to extend the camping experience to the reality experience that the kids are having every day. And that may not set well with a lot of churches and pastors, because you say, well, that's the role that churches play. Well, then doggone it, play that role in their lives. But the gap exists so greatly between the culture and the experience they've had in camp and the inability of many churches to fill that gap anymore, that a camp has to think about what role they play in extending the reality of the camp experience to the reality of where the kids and the culture is that they're living in.
Yeah. I had a situation, this is years ago now, but I was hanging out with a youth pastor, and youth pastor came up to me and he said, "Hey, I am so thankful that you have your campers still memorize Bible verses." And I went, wait, did I hear what you said right?
Yeah.
And you just told me that I was doing that. Aren't you doing that? And you go, "No, that's what you do at camp." And I'm like, no.
Yeah.
I think it's a shared mentality.
Yeah.
Where if denominationally or just churches in general, I think if the camp and the churches can lean on each other and create those experiences and both be mindful of the growth of the kids and both be mindful of the salvation moment through the discipleship moment, through hopefully the kids grow up and be in ministry someday.
Right.
But if everybody is mindful, that's the best case scenario, that everybody picks up their piece of that organization, operation, the pieces, and puts them in place.
Yeah.
But you're right. When one of the pieces falls aside or one of the pieces isn't quite there, man, it's really hard for either of the church or the camp to do any of it by themselves.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. I don't mean to sit here and sound just because I'm sitting in the camp. To sound like I'm down on the church. But I think that gap between what's happened in the life of the kid at camp and what the church can or can't do, that needs to be constantly mindful of the fact that there could be a gap there.
And I think my next question is basically, where do you think camp's going? But let me ask it a different way. Do you think camp's moving towards the future, one of the things that we might need to do is reach out to those churches and make sure that we're sharing that vision for that camper that's going back and forth. Is there in communication or what is it, something that you think camping needs to increase or get better at or work on moving towards the future?
I think camp could play a bigger role in education.
Okay, how so?
I'm afraid that many of our institutions of higher learning have become disconnected from the fundamental biblical teachings that we have.
Yeah.
And I think the camp can develop much more. And I guess I sit here at a podcast and I sit here and say, it's social media that'll carry that message. You capture the attention of a kid for many things at a camp. And the gap, I keep saying, the gap that exists between what happens here and the culture out here is so great that I would wish for camps that they could play a greater role in the education of that kid from here to understand this. Because their attention and everything has been captured here, and their soul has been fed here many, many times. And I think to expand upon that is probably a role that camps could play more in the future by using
different social media, different means, just to keep feeding the kids.
Quite honest, it's a great marketing tool for bringing them back to say this is a place where this. But I also feel that there may be a gap between what the camp is and has the capacity to do and what the local church is. I think the camp can learn from pastors in the local church, but I think the pastors have a lot to learn from what camps have done.
Yeah, try to team that effort, kind of,
and I don't
understand what each other's doing.
I don't have any magic to answer that, how that happens. But I think our formal education processes have gone too. For instance, take a university. When a school becomes a university, they infuse their theological training, if they have a theological school, into the university, and it becomes one of the schools of the many. And it gets lost in the shuffle.
You put in all those years here, then you put in all those years at CCA, in camps in general. I know as I'm getting older at 55 years old and going to retire in the next 10, 15 years, I wake up worried that the next person's going to take Trout in the right direction and keep strong biblically. As you've been retired, how long?
Well, actually 15 years.
15 years. So when you're at your place of having this unbelievable impact, are you concerned that the impact becomes less of camping in the spiritual takeaways? I mean, where you sit, is that something you wake up in the middle of the night like, oh no, did somebody, because I know I think about, I'm going to have to eventually hand the camp over to the next group. And again, there's a lot of camps in that process of, hey, the the leaderships are going to change. The doers of the work are going to change. Now, looking back at your unbelievable time in ministry, is that a worry that you have?
No.
Okay, why not?
I've always believed, there's a fundamental thing that I've always believed, is that when you have a place of ministry,
Yep.
you should be totally consumed and passionate about it. And you should own the mission of the organization.
Yep.
But the organization should never own you.
Oh, okay.
And when you begin to believe the lie that the organization owns you, then you begin to believe that you're so important that nobody can replace you.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
No, it does make sense. Yeah.
So if you come at this thing from a kingdom standpoint of ministry, you don't worry about what follows because you know it's the kingdom of God and he's going to, by his graces, bring in the right
See what
person.
he's going to do. Yeah.
So you become so impassioned and consumed 60, 70, 80 hours a week. I know.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah.
But if you begin to believe the lie that it's all dependent upon you, you can't ever let go. So every organization I've left, I've been able to let go for some reason. And I think it's from that fundamental belief that what I'm doing is in the kingdom of God. I'm not speaking down to you if you think that's a problem, because it becomes a problem for you because you become so consumed with the mission you're on.
For sure.
But the mission you're on is to build the kingdom of God.
Yep.
And God will always have a replacement in the kingdom that is either better than you or it'll carry on. And if they're worse than you, it'll survive.
You act like David's been dead for a while. And Paul passed away at some point, right?
Yeah.
And still it kept going.
That may mean somewhat, that may chide some people, but it's to challenge people that we're in the kingdom work. And that even though we're so consumed by what the kingdom work is that we're doing right now, it's something that you should be able to let go freely.
Wow.
And that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Because every breathing minute is given to what you are doing now.
Yeah.
But I just believe as a fundamental belief.
That's a great reminder.
And you see, I can testify to that because it got better after me. Roger Kammerer came, and then Wick came, and now you're here. And it just gets better. Now, were there bumps in the road?
Oh, for sure.
And I looked at it and say, oh, I wish they wouldn't be doing that. Yeah, but I don't look over my shoulder that much.
Yeah, I like that. I like that mindset. I love that mindset. So, what, if anything, we talked a little bit about the future of camping. What is your hope for camping from this point on? What is your hope that that it's able to achieve, either standing on the things that you put in place or whatever? What's your hope for it?
Well, I would hope, we talked about this. I'll go back to where we were, and I can't see beyond that. But go back to the fact that camping as a phenomenon, as an experience where people come away for a short period of time, whether it's couples retreats or families retreats or third graders or whatever it is, that concept will continue in different forms. And the forms that I see it continuing in the future are the forms we talked about, either multiple sites on one site, like you've done here so very well, or sites dispersed over a bigger volume of stuff that you can leverage. That's the future. Now, what's happening is a little bit interesting. We haven't talked at all about the international. And when I was at Christian Camping International USA, we became partners with and were the sole or the major generator of camping in Russia. I think that some camps ought to think about their role in the global community, because it's not only the global community in that you go there, but they come here. And that could open a whole nother discussion about how our culture has changed in terms of the dynamic of people coming here. Whether they should be here or not here, as we know, is kind of an interesting subject. And I don't want to get off into that arena, except to say that the complexion of nations is changing because of migration of people. And I think that camps have got to be aware that the person coming to their camp, or should be coming to their camp, may be of a different tradition, background than typically is their demographic now.
Yeah, and that's always been a point that the national camping group always really pushes, like, hey, in the future, not every camper is going to be a white suburban kid, and that's something that we really have to be mindful of. And it went two ways. One, you're right. In your time in that, man, there are so many camps being developed in other nations. Right. And I think now it's so many staff that are coming from other nations and working at our camps. And so there's this constant growth of the community is not as small as it once was that your campers and your staff came from. It's gotten so much bigger.
Well, during the last 2 decades, of course, we've understood that Christianity has spread faster in the southern hemisphere than the northern hemisphere.
Yeah.
And in the southern hemisphere now, because of the growth of Christianity and the growth of the Christianity in the southern hemisphere, that many of those are not highly developed countries.
Yeah.
And so what intrigues me a bit is, what is the role that camp plays to those who do not have the means financially to go to camp? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that is a totally different phenomenon, because camping as a phenomenon is basically a Western concept. And it was grown, it grew because people, the haves, had the ability to send their kids to camp financially. So I think now camping in the southern hemisphere is very different, and the growth of camping in the southern hemisphere is greater than the growth in North America. Yeah. And what effect is that going to have? Yeah. What part does this place play in making sure that happens? Yeah. I don't know for sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't know much for sure. Yeah. I know a lot of things for sure, but I don't know about that one. I don't know what that's going to do. Yeah. But I do know that when I was at Christian Camping International, that the U.S. division, we had about 1,000 camps. We got up to 1,100 camps one day, and we celebrated that day. That was the largest association has ever been. But we were running about 1,000 camps, and I knew that one of the things that I had started was that a global outreach group, and that was to connect camps with cross-cultural ministries and ministries in other parts of the world. Yeah. And so I think there's a fair amount that's going to come. Yeah. Growth is going to come through that, but that'll be a different way of looking at it.
But it's definitely something that, again, cutting edge back then in the 90s talking about it, but we're there now.
You are.
What we were talking about in the 90s, that now we really have to be mindful of all the different cultures, all the different backgrounds of kids coming through.
Yeah, and I just became aware talking to you about how many international students you could bring on staff. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's either a start or a very interesting cross-cultural kind of a thing that's going to happen.
And what's amazing, too, is you get the kids that come from all these countries to be on staff. For us, it's 50 of 170 summer staff or international kids, but then they go back to their home in Ireland, then they go back to their home in Brazil, then they go back to their home in Australia, New Zealand, and they'll tell us stories of how what their time here affects what they went back home to. It's amazing how God's using camp in those ways, which I don't know if they were on the tip of your tongue back then. But it was like, man, that could happen sometime.
I couldn't tell you one international student we had during the 70s. We were so concerned about just basically surviving in the environment we were in, you know.
Wow.
But no, that was not even, that was way out there. Yeah. So,
well, everybody, we've got to cut this off. I think Bob and I could literally talk nonstop forever about camping. I think we could, but we'll have to do another episode sometime when we get you back up to camp again. But thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks so much for Bob for coming up and being a part of this. And again, I cannot say it enough. Thanks so much for the effort that you put into Trout Lake, the effort that you put into CCI, and all the amazing things that you did under God's guidance to make camping what it is today. I sure appreciate that.
Praise be to God. And thank you, James, for being so respectful. And I appreciate that. It makes my heart feel good.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everybody.